Well, here we are. Let's start chapter 17. This is going to be about this time period called the New Imperialism. And I kind of want to jump into the notes because I don't know how long it's going to take. All right, so you guys know me. I like to do my little introduction before we get started in the notes. So let's talk about what we are going to talk about in this chapter. What is imperialism? So the definition of imperialism that your book gives, it says it's an extension of a nation's authority over other nations or areas through conquest, political, or economic dominance. What does this mean? Well, it's when one nation conquers and dominates another nation. So let's say, for instance, Great Britain goes into India, which we're going to talk about today, and they take over, they take their natural resources, all that stuff. That's imperialism. Okay? So when one nation kind of conquers politically or economically another nation. Very simple. All right, now, imperialism is not new. We've talked about how Europeans have been in the Americas in the 16th and 17th centuries. If you guys remember, Columbus came over and landed in Haiti, and that was the beginning of the colonization of the Americas. Sorry, guys, I'm trying to get comfortable here. Urgh. And we talked about, all the stuff that led to the conquering of the Native Americans, taking a whole bunch of gold and silver out of the Americas, sending it to Europe, and all that stuff, right? So that was a form of imperialism, and Europeans have been doing it since the 15th century. But in the 19th century, the 1800s, this thing called the new imperialism comes around. And the new imperialism is going to be obviously different than the old form of imperialism that we've already talked about. But the new imperialism is very, significant, or not significant, but it's very, the new imperialism, what I'm trying to say is it just means the imperialism that was going on in the 1800s, all right? So, for one, Europeans are going to shift to Africa and Asia, all right? So the old imperialism was in the Americas, and in the new imperialism, pretty much the Americas have already been colonized, and if you guys remember in a chapter a while back, the United States kind of threatened other people that no more colonizing in the Americas. So Europeans are going to shift from the Americas to Africa and to Asia, although Europeans are kind of already there. Now, the purpose of the new imperialism was to exploit resources. All right, so the first imperialism was to kind of create colonies, all right, where Europeans could live, like in the Americas. But the second one is literally going to be about the Industrial Revolutions going on, and Europeans need natural resources. So they're going to go to Africa and get precious metals. They're going to go into Asia and get spices and all kinds of things, or cotton, you're going to see in India, all to fuel their industrial economies. All right, so that's kind of the name of the game in the new imperialism is Europeans. They're industrializing and they need natural resources, and they're going to get it from all over the world. So what motivated Europeans to conquer Asia and Africa? Lots of things. All right, number one. So, social Darwinism. We talked about this in the last chapter. That was the idea that some Europeans were better than others, right? So, this belief that some Europeans or Europeans are better than others is going to cause them to have very little problems in conquering nations that they believe are full of people that are inferior to them. So, that's a big driving force, is social Darwinism. Another thing that they're going to say is a big driving force is Europeans want to spread democracy and these new liberal Enlightenment ideas to the rest of the world. They're going to go into Africa and Asia, and they're going to see tribal and nomadic people, and they're going to say, you know what? These people are oppressed. They need democracy. And of course, the biggest thing that Europeans will say that they are doing is spreading Christianity, right? That's another motivation. Europeans are going to go into, like I said, these areas with what they consider pagan religions, tribal religions, and they're going to say, well, you're not worshiping God. You guys need Jesus. And they are going to spread Christianity, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not so much, to all of these other nations. And one other thing is Western technology is going to drive them. Because Westerners have modern steamboats and they have, later on in the late 19th century, gas-powered ships, they're going to be far more powerful than other places, and they're going to be able to get to these places really quick. So there's a lot of things that motivate Europeans to drive into Asia and Africa. So, the effects of imperialism. Was it beneficial to these nations? Was it harmful? So, guys, this is a complicated question and one that we are going to evaluate for a very long time. and one we're going to evaluate till the end of the year. What effects, guys, did imperialism have? What effects did it have on the nations that conquered? And what did it have on the nations that God conquered? That got conquered. Did I say God conquered? I mean, in a way. That got conquered. Okay? So, is it going to be beneficial to Africa? All right? The continent of Africa, that Europeans were there. Is it going to be harmful to the continent of Africa, that Europeans were there? Is it going to be beneficial to the continent of Asia, that Europeans were there? Is it going to be harmful? The answer is yes. Okay? Is it more harmful than beneficial? That depends on who you ask. All right, so one big thing is for sure, is that imperialism is going to cause a lot of future conflicts. It's going to be a cause of World War I. It's going to be a cause of today's problems in the Middle East. It's going to be a cause of revolutions that are going to happen after World War II. So, imperialism is going to have a profound effect, and is still having today a profound effect on the world. Okay? So, pause if you need to. Let's move into the next slide. All right, so here's our first question, 17.1. How did British imperialism affect India? And how did it affect China? But we're only going to talk about India today, all right? I forgot to change the essential question, guys. It should just say affect India. Tomorrow we'll talk about China, okay? So today we're going to talk about how the British go into India and how does it affect India, all right? Pause if you need to. All right, so before I jump into this, I just want to give you a brief review about the kind of imperialism we've already talked about. So let me just quickly review the Age of Discovery. And the Age of Discovery was anywhere from 1492, where Columbus, discovered, quote unquote, discovered the Americas, all the way up until, well, pretty much the trade wars of the American Revolution, so the late 1700s. So let's talk about the old European empires. Here's a map, guys, way back in the day, and you can see Europe right here. All right, you can see the different empires, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, the Dutch, the British, and kind of where they went around the world. And you can see the Portuguese were all the way over in, they were the first nation to really get over into India and Asia, but you can see the Dutch got over there, the British got over there, all that stuff. So this is not a new idea. The Portugal in the 15th and 16th centuries, they were the dominant area, and they went into coastal Africa, as you can see right here. Okay, they went into Brazil, as you can see right here, and they even went into Asia. But if you remember, the Portuguese quickly got overran by the Dutch. All right? We'll talk about that in a second. So, the Spanish in the 15th and 16th centuries, they didn't go to Asia. They went to basically South America, and they went to Mexico, which is in the green, right? So, if you remember, another thing that we talked about were the encomiendas. Remember, the encomienda was the forced labor system where Native Americans were used as slave labor. And then later on, if you guys remember, we talked about Bartolomeo de las Casas, and he was one of the Spanish priests that says, hey, Native Americans are dying. We're being so cruel to them. Why don't we use African slaves instead? And that's exactly what they started doing. And that kind of began, well, actually started with the Portuguese, the Atlantic slave trade. Okay, and we know that lasted for a very long time, up until the early 1800s for the Europeans, and the United States didn't get rid of slavery until 1865. So then the English and then the Dutch and the French, you guys can see how they spread all over the world, North America into the 17th, 18th centuries, and characteristic of the English, Dutch, and French are also African slavery, large plantations that we've talked about before, like sugar, cotton, things like that, were the big things in the 17th and 18th centuries. Okay? All right, another big thing of these was mercantilism. Do you guys remember mercantilism? It was the idea that basically colonies existed for one thing to give gold and silver and other raw goods to the mother country, and then the mother country would then sell them back, right? It's one of the reasons the American Revolution happened, if you remember, guys, because Americans didn't like mercantilism. They wanted to trade with other people, and that's one of the things that led them to revolt against the British, right? Okay, so why did I show you guys this? I just wanted to show you, hey, remember, Europeans are already all over the place, okay? All right, pause if you need to. Okay, so let's talk about this thing called free trade, okay? Now, free trade was something that we learned about in the Enlightenment chapter, all right? It's a very liberal idea. So you might be thinking, okay, what the heck was free trade again? All right, well, you need, like I said, to understand this new imperialism, you kind of need to understand free trade, and that's why I'm talking about it right now, Okay? All right, so here's a map of the British Empire in 1815. Now, why are we going to talk about the British? Well, guys, the British Empire is going to be the largest European empire. At one point, it covered 25% of all the world's land. So think about that, guys. Tiny little Great Britain owned 25% of all the land on Earth. As a matter of fact, in the British Empire, there was a saying that the sun never sets on the British Empire. Why does the sun never set? Because somewhere in the British Empire, because it's all over the world, the sun is shining, right? So that's pretty much a way that Great Britain flexes on people. All right, so what is free trade? It's basically any nation, like Great Britain, should be able to buy and sell goods to other nations. Okay? So think of it. It's the idea that literally if Great Britain wants to sell stuff to Asia, to China in Asia, to India, or to parts of Africa, then they ought to be able to do so. All right? Free trade. Basically, nobody should be able to restrict it. Okay? Now, those goods are controlled by tariffs or taxes on imported goods. Now, we'll talk more about tariffs in a little bit. I just wanted to throw the word tariff in there because I want you guys to kind of know how kind of tariffs work. But anyway, we'll talk about that here in a little bit, all right? But a tariff basically is just a tax on goods that are imported. Remember, imports are goods that are sold from one country to your country, and exports are goods that you as a country sell to other people, right? Imports, exports, okay? Tariffs are taxes on imports. So the idea of free trade had been a liberal idea through the 1700s and the 1800s. So basically, in the Enlightenment, there was this idea that the absolute monarch should not control trade. That actually restricts trade, right? So people like Adam Smith argued, hey, we should have free trade. Basically, any private company that wants to trade ought to be able to trade. Laissez-faire is where that comes from. So before free trade, mercantilism existed. So remember, mercantilism was the idea, like I said, that Great Britain did where, and all the countries did it, France, all the absolute nations did it. But it's the idea that basically you have colonies for one reason, to give you raw goods. And the more colonies that you have, the more prestigious your nation was. So, guys, in the, 1700s, Great Britain was pretty prestigious because it had the American colonies. And Spain was still kind of powerful because it had the South American colonies, right? So, anyway, that's mercantilism. That was before the idea of free trade. And then the Enlightenment comes around, guys, and then people are going to start arguing for free trade, okay? All right, now, more about tariffs. Real quick, I want to explain this to you. So, countries raise tariffs to protect their own industries, okay? So, let me give you an idea. Let's say the United States has a tariff on cotton, right? If Great Britain tries to sell cotton to the United States, we raise the tax, and that will cause Great Britain to sell less cotton in our country. Think about it. If you're Great Britain, you don't want to pay that tax, right? So if the taxes are high, you are going to sell less cotton. Well, what good does it do to raise a tariff? Well, it actually protects our industries. Think about it. If you are an American cotton producer and Great Britain is not selling cotton in your country, then that protects you from competition, yes? So raising tariff protects businesses, but it might hurt consumers because think about it. If I'm an American cotton grower and I don't have British cotton to compete with, I might jack up the prices because I don't have to compete. So raising tariffs theoretically protects businesses, but might hurt consumers because prices of goods go up, right? But if we lower tariffs, then that helps consumers because competition with other nations usually lowers the price, and consumers like us get a better price for the goods, right? But business owners complain about lowering tariffs because if you lower tariffs, then it's going to make them compete more, and they might not make as much money, right? So think about, and this is really a big thing in APUSH, but you also need to know it here, what raising tariffs and lowering tariffs actually does. Okay? Pause if you need to. All right, now let's get back to what we're talking about, the British, okay? So now I want to spend the rest of the time, guys, talking about the British in India. And it all starts with the British East India Company. Have you guys ever seen the movie The Pirates of the Caribbean, movies 1, 2, and 3? Well, the bad guy, especially in episodes 2 and 3, are the British East India Company. All right, so you might think, what is the East India Company? I'll get there in a second, but it's basically a private company that was allowed by Parliament to go into India and start selling stuff to India, right? It's kind of the British were trying to use a company to kind of push trade and conquer India, but we'll talk about it here in a second, all right? So let's talk about India before the British, because you need to understand how India was before the British got there before you can understand how India changed, okay? So before, by the way, here's India, guys. It's a part of Asia. It's just southwest of China, and it's east of Africa in the Middle East, right? So it's south of Russia. You guys can kind of see. All right, Great Britain and Western Europe, guys, is like over here where my cursor is, all right? Okay, so it was divided by a whole bunch of different princes, all right? It's called the Mughal Empire, all right? Now, technically, there was like a Mughal emperor, all right, Mughal, but in all honesty, the different princes kind of did their own thing. It's kind of like Germany. You had the different royalty kind of doing their own thing, right? It was very divided, all right? The Mughal rulers, guys, ruled most of India. But like I said, if you were a prince, an Indian prince, then you kind of did your own thing and you didn't want to be told by the emperor what you should or should not do. All right? So when the British get there, they're going to find a very divided India, all right? Now, it's not only divided by the princes, it's also divided by religion. Now, the original religions in India were Hinduism and Buddhism, all right? And we'll kind of talk about that as it relates a little bit later on, but in general, let's talk about Hinduism being the big one. Hindus believe in a lot of kind of different things, but they believe basically in building up karma throughout your life by doing good deeds, and then when you die, then what happens is you get reincarnated as something better. If you build up a lot of bad karma and you die, you get reincarnated as something worse in life. Reincarnated means brought back to life in a different form. Okay? So that's a lot different than European Christians. You're going to see there's going to be a big struggle between European Christians and Hindus. All right, because Christians are going to say, you guys got this crazy religion, and Hindus are going to, say, you guys got the crazy religion. Leads to a big conflict. But you know what else? There's Buddhists, and there's also Muslims that live in India. So not only is it extremely divided by princes and rulers, it's also divided by a religion. Okay? Now, it's also divided by this thing called the caste system. All right, now it's hard to explain, guys, but basically a long time ago, very long time ago, the Indian people were conquered by Aryans, and no, not the Aryans that Europeans believe in, but they were conquered by a group of people that dominated India and enforced this thing called the caste system. Now, a caste system, guys, is simply a hierarchy of order, a ranking of people. All right, you can kind of look at this like old feudal Europe, kind of. All right, so the people at the top of the system were priests. They were the small amount of people that kind of were the most important people in society. Underneath them, you had what are called kshatriyas, which were warriors and kings, and then underneath those, you would have the middle classes like the Vishu, the merchants, the landowners. Then you would have the Shudras, which were commoners, peasants, servants. At the very bottom would have been the dirtiest people, and dirtiest because they would have done the most horrible jobs in society, like cleaning latrines and sweeping streets and dealing with dead bodies. Those were called the untouchables, and those really weren't even considered a part of the caste system. They were considered outcasts. All right? So here's the deal about the caste system. It's very strict, and it's very dominant, and basically, if you are born any of these castes, then you cannot move up or down. There's no social mobility. So it's kind of like a peasant in Europe. If you're born a peasant, there's no way that you're going to be, well, I guess unless the king knighted you, but in India, there's no way to move up or down. You can't marry out of your caste. So if you're born a peasant, you're going to die a peasant. If you're born an untouchable, you're going to die an untouchable. Okay? So that kind of fits in with their religion. What hope do you ever have in life is you can hope to build up enough karma and die so you get reincarnated as something better in the next life. All right? So let's talk about the East India Company. Now, in 1600, the East India Company, guys, goes rolling up into India. All right? So it's a British trading company in India, and the goal was to go there, set up forts, set up fortifications, and eventually start to trade and bring stuff back to Great Britain, like spices. Okay? But what happened was the East India Company goes there and they slowly start to conquer India. They start to wage war against the Indian princes and they start to take their own territory. All right? So it becomes more than just getting resources. They actually start to conquer land. Okay? When the Mughal rulers would die, literally the East India Company would just take over the land of that prince. So pretty soon, guys, not all of India, but 85% of India is controlled by the British East India Company. Now, you might say, how do these guys do it? Well, the East India Company had their own military, but eventually they start recruiting people in India and hire them as soldiers. We'll talk about those guys a little bit later. They're called sepoys, but it's basically just an Indian soldier that fights for the British East India Company. So the company gets there in 1600, and slowly over the next 200 years, they start to dominate and they start to conquer. All right? Pretty soon, like I said, India is pretty much under the control of the British East India Company and making tons of money. Pause if you need to. All right, so let's talk about what life was like under British rule under the East India Company. So what was it like in India after the British got there? Well, let's talk about some changes. Now, changes are really relative. The British are going to say that these are good changes. The Indian people are going to be divided. Some people might say they're good changes. Some people might say they're bad changes. But bottom line is when Europeans, and this is part of imperialism, guys, when Europeans show up somewhere, they start to enforce their ideas and their language and their culture onto native people. Why? Because they believe that European culture is superior to native culture. So let's talk about some of these changes. So obviously, when the British come over, they introduced Western ideas. Okay, so they're going to bring with them modern ideas. They're going to bring with them modern laws, modern notions of equality. Okay, why? Because that's what Europeans believe in. And of course, they're going to bring over Christianity. So they're going to start teaching Indian people about Jesus of Nazareth and about Christianity. And some Indian people are going to like that and accept that. And some Indian people are not going to like that because they're Hindu, Buddhist, or Muslim. But either way, Europeans are going to start pushing these ideas. All right, now, one big thing that the British are going to say, if you were to ask the British, hey, what good did you do there? Well, before the East India Company, there were these people called the Thuggee. Now, the Thuggee were highway robbers that preyed on Indian travelers. Now, if you've ever seen the movie Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, the main bad guys that practice all these sacrifices and pull people's hearts out, it's really gross, those guys are called the Thuggee. All right. So what the Thuggee would do, guys, is they would literally terrorize Indian people by walking up and down the roads and basically killing them and robbing them. All right. As a matter of fact, it's where we in the West get the word thug. It comes from Thuggee. All right. So guess what? When the East India Company came over, one of the first things they did is they wiped out the Thuggee. They arrested and killed and fought all these robbers. So you might say, well, hey, that's good, right? The Indian people are going to benefit from that. All right. So, what happens next? Another thing they tried to do was they saw the caste system and they're like, you know what, this is actually cruel that you can't move up and down in the caste system. So they started to teach Indian people about natural rights. Hey, all humans are born with natural rights, life, liberty, property. Now, obviously, they don't mean that they're equal to Europeans, but they want to start teaching the Indian people about natural rights. So they ended slavery, and they started to push for things like equality. All right? Now, you guys are going to find this fascinating. So another thing, oh wait, we are talking about that, the caste system. All right, now, one of the things, guys, that the British found most shocking about Indian society was this practice called sati. All right? So, here's what sati is. Basically, it was a Hindu practice of when a wealthy Hindu man would die and he was married, what would happen is they would burn his body on fire, and his widow, his wife, that was still alive, was supposed to sit on the funeral pyre and be burned alive with her dead husband's body. Okay? This was showing like a female, the wife's commitment to her husband, and it was a way for her to kind of keep honor after her husband died. Now, this is shocking, as you can imagine, to a Christian European that sees a woman being burned alive on the funeral pyre of her husband's dead body. So, this was a very shocking practice. And when the British show up, they are going to end this practice. All right? Now, you might say, wow, yeah, duh, they're going to end that practice. But what if you are a Hindu woman that actually wants to commit sati because you think it will keep your honor in your religion? All right, so you might say, well, that's not fair. But bottom line is the British banned this practice. And yes, some women did it willingly because they wanted to, and some women were forced to commit sati against their will and were basically murdered on the funeral pyre of their husband's dead body. But shocking, yes? But that was a practice, guys, of some wealthy Hindu men, all right? Mostly the priests, okay? So they got rid of that. Another thing, guys, is the British are going to give people jobs. Like, they're going to hire men to serve in the East India Company, and those guys are going to be called sepoys, all right? So basically, guys, some Indian men are going to serve for the British East India Company military, all right? Now, one more thing is this. Now, not all Hindus practice sati. It was pretty much only the Hindu priests, all right? But if you are a regular Hindu woman and your husband died, then you were not allowed to remarry, and basically your life sucked after that, because think about it. If you can't remarry, you've got no means of making money. So, Great Britons thought this was unfair, and they started to pass laws allowing Hindu widows to remarry. So once again, you think about all of these things, you think, wow, these are all good things, right? Okay, well, here's the deal, guys. Changes can be good, but bottom line is they are changes, okay? And what the British didn't understand when they were making these changes on these people, even though they thought they were doing good, changes are going to make people unhappy, and they're going to feel like that they are being kind of controlled by a different group of people, and that's going to lead to, guys, a fight, okay? All right, pause if you need to. Okay, so, discontent. Well, here's a sepoy. Well, here's the deal. While sepoys might like serving for the British East India Company and making money, they were forced to serve overseas. And in a way, some Hindus believe that serving another country overseas was kind of against their religion, against their culture. So a lot of sepoys were unhappy when they got shipped by the British East India Company to go somewhere else. All right? Allowing Hindu women to remarry was a good thing in some people's eyes, but think about it, guys, that is against Hindu religion. So once again, basically, even though the British are doing something that they think is a good thing, they are changing religion. Okay? So once again, guys, one thing that you cannot mess with people is their religion. All right? Now, here's going to be a big thing. In 1857, a rumor spreads that British bullets used by sepoys are greased in cow and pig fat. Now, hold on just a second. You might think, bullets greased? What do you mean? If you've ever held a bullet, there's a very thin layer of grease on a bullet that you put in a gun, right? And this thin layer of grease helps a bullet slide out of a barrel. All right? Now, there's a rumor going around in the 1850s that the grease that the sepoys used, the grease is made out of the fat of cows and pigs. And you might think, well, whoop-de-doo. Well, think about this. I don't know if you know this, but Hindus believe that cows are a sacred animal that you should not kill. And if you, as a sepoy, are forced to use a bullet that is greased in the fat of a sacred animal like a cow, then you are offended and you are unclean now. Muslims believe that pigs are unclean, right? You should not eat pork. You shouldn't touch pork. Right? So, if you are a Muslim soldier and you're using a bullet that is greased in the fat of a pig, then that is not okay. That is unclean. That is against your religion. Now, was it true? The answer is no. But it didn't matter. The sepoys believed it was true. Why does it matter? Here's why. So there's this thing called the Sepoy Uprising that happens in 1857. All right? Now, it's called the Sepoy Uprising. I call it the Sepoy Uprising, but some people used to call it the Sepoy Mutiny. And a mutiny means like you're rebelling against your rulers, right? But Indian people don't like that word because, think about it, they didn't believe the British were their rightful rulers. So let's call it an uprising, okay? All right, so what happens? Well, sepoys refuse to use British bullets, and a group of them in one city are arrested and paraded through the streets as criminals. Now, what happens? Well, after years and years and decades and generations, guys, of British imposing their will upon Indian people, they're finally going to ignite and they're going to explode in a fight. So, here's what happens. After these guys get arrested and are paraded through town, Indian people have had enough. Sepoys all over India start attacking British citizens when they see them, killing men, women, children, all over India. All right? It's a massacre in some places. Hundreds of men, women, and children are going to die. You might be like, why are women and children there that are British? Well, guys, government officials and military leaders brought their families with them. All right? So, all in all, in one city, guys, the city of Kanpur, British men, women, and children were like cut down by sepoy swords, all right? And all in all, guys, maybe hundreds of British people died in this uprising, but the uprising eventually gets put down. But what this shows is, guys, is look, here's a massive rebellion. It starts in one city and it spreads all over India, where Indian people are upset with British rule, all right? Now, it's kind of like what happened with the American Revolution. There was a fight, except the British were able to put down the rebellion and stop the sepoys from killing any more people. But what this shows the British is that they're going to have to make some serious changes in the future. All right? So, we're going to stop right here with our notes.